there, welcome to our live event. My name is Brenda K.B. Anderson. I am a crochet designer and crochet instructor, and today I'm very excited to share with you guys the Sharron Shoulder Bag. This is what we're going to be making today. I'm going to lead you through this tutorial step by step so you can make your own at home. So this bag came about because I had a whole bunch of scraps and I was on vacation somewhere else and I didn't really have a pattern. I didn't know what I wanted to make, and then I just started making granny squares, and then I realized, oh, I can make a bag. I actually need a bag right now. So I put it together, and I have been using this bag for years, actually. I brought in the original, which is the picture on your download. So if you guys want to go ahead and follow along, you can go ahead and download this. This is the complete instructions. Got all the instructions. There's a diagram in here. There's a chart in case you are chart people. If you don't know what that means yet, that's okay. We'll get to that. But the full instructions are in here, but I will be going through everything as well. But this pictured right here, I brought that bag in just to show you guys. I have been basically wearing this for the last, I don't know, few years at least. Pretty much nonstop. It's like my go-to bag. It's the perfect size for me. And you can throw it in, if you make if you use yarn that is machine washable, you can throw it in the washing machine to clean it up. I probably should do that now, looking at it. But I just wanted to bring this in here so that you guys could see what it looks like after you've been using it for very heavy use for years, okay? Because sometimes I think that that's helpful to see how projects hold up over time. So I've got a bunch of new samples in progress here, and I, on purpose, chose to do some different color schemes so that you guys could just sort of, I don't know, take a look at, just some different ways to use color throughout this whole process. I'm not going to be talking too much about color, but I will kind of try to call it out as I go through all of those different samples so you guys can see the differences between them and how I use color. But this is a great project for scraps. Granny squares are awesome for using scraps. It's a way to combine a bunch of different colors together that maybe you didn't even think looked good together before, but when you crochet them all up, they somehow look like they belong together. And it features a lining in here. So we have a fabric lining that's stitched in, so that makes it all the more durable. Okay, so it's not going to stretch out of shape. And we've got a zipper, as you can see here, a zipper in the top. I'm going to be showing you how to do both of those things. You don't have to have any prior sewing experience to follow along with this tutorial. And then the strap is a braid. So we're just gonna, and I'll be showing you how to do that. And it runs through these little circles here on the end. Those are like a little crocheted, actually I'll pull this one out so you guys can see. It's a little crocheted ring that we're gonna make and stitch to our bag. And the great thing about this is, besides it looking kind of cool, and it allows you to have this sort of tassel, so, it basically doubles as a handle and a tassel, or a strap and a tassel. But it also allows you to adjust your bag somewhat. So sometimes if you want to wear it longer, you could tie the knot, further down. If you wanted to wear it shorter, you could tie the knot further up and have this hanging if you're just not quite sure. I have found that sometimes when I make a bag, the handle, especially if it's crocheted, the handle tends to stretch out a little bit over time. This stretches a little less than a regular crochet strap would, just because of how it's constructed, but it will stretch a little bit. Once you start putting heavy things in your bag, it will stretch a little bit. But this way of attaching your handle allows you to go back in later and just you can go ahead and just feed this back through the ring and pull it down a little further, tie the knot higher up, and you can unbraid that, and then you can also trim off the tassels if you like, to adjust your strap later on as you're wearing it. So that makes it really a very functional piece, because then you can get the strap exactly how you want it. Because I know it's frustrating sometimes when you crochet a bag and you think it's going to be great, and then about a month later you're like, this kind of stretched out a little and it's not perfect. Can I take this apart? How should I fix this? That's happened to me many times, so I was kind of addressing that issue. All right, so what you're going to need is a bunch of different colors. In the pattern, I am telling you to use 5 colors. So we've got 4 of the main colors that are in the squares. Here, let me pull in a square here. This is in progress. So we've got 4 colors here. Here I'm going to be using this pink, this sort of oatmeal color, green, and then this turquoise. And then the 5th color is a border around the edge of of the square, of each square. So I'm going to be using these four colors for the square, and then the border is the gray, okay? But of course, you can use color however you like to. You know, you can do it completely scrappy, like this version here. This is in progress, of course, it's not finished, but I just wanted to show you, I just used a bunch of scraps, and then I did the last 2 rounds in white of each square to kind of have that center of color and a little more white space around each one. That's what I use here. Or if you're more of a neutrals person, I've got, you know, just that oatmeal color and then sort of a rusty brown. And I just went back and forth between the colors, you know, brown, oatmeal, and then I did the last round in the oatmeal color. Okay, so there's lots of different options to suit anybody's color palette. You know, you probably already have some scraps that you already like the colors of, and you can just kind of pull from that. I always recommend, you know, go to your stash first, see what you already have, and then you can get something to supplement that if you need extra. But you'll be needing about 375 yards of a worsted weight yarn. So most of what I'm using today is acrylic. I do have a little bit of wool mixed in. You can use acrylic or wool, or if you want to, you could even use a cotton or a cotton linen blend. Really, you know, you have lots of options here. I do recommend acrylic and wool in the pattern because that'll look the most like what I have here, but don't, you know, if you have cotton and you're wondering if that'll work, it will definitely work. And the great thing about that is probably not going to pill at all, which acrylic tends to do a little bit. You might have to do a little bit of maintenance every year and pick the little pills off of your bag if you get, you know, if it's with heavy use, but it's worth it because it looks awesome. And then you're going to need a fabric for the lining. So that's what I have here. You're going to just this is doubled here. So I've got 2 pieces of fabric, and it just needs to be bigger than your crocheted bag. So I would crochet the bag first and then go to the fabric store and get your fabric so that you know exactly how big it needs to be. But it's somewhere around a half a yard. And then of course you're going to need a hook. So we're using a 4mm hook, which is a G, but you can use any size hook that you need to in order to either get gauge, like the same gauge that I got. So you would crochet up a square and then compare it to my squares or what I have listed in the gauge in the pattern. Or if you don't care if your bag's a little bigger or a little smaller, it really doesn't matter that much for this project. You just want to make sure when you're crocheting it up that you have a fairly firm gauge. You don't want to have very loosey, drapey fabric because then it's going to get all stretched out and it's not going to hold up very well over time. Okay, so I'm using a 4mm, but you can use whatever you need to in order to, you know, crochet that up and have it be a fabric that you like the feel of. You also need something to mark your fabric. You can use a pencil, you could use a fabric marker, you know, you could use chalk if you're using a darker colored fabric. Oh, I should mention the fabric I'm using is, this is it's like a medium to heavyweight, kind of quilter's cotton. It's just sort of a nicer quilter's cotton. But you could use denim. Denim works great, it's nice and sturdy. You just don't want to use anything that's too lightweight because it may rip over time or might kind of fray over time. But definitely use a woven because that's going to keep your bag from stretching out. That's going to give it the extra structure. You will be needing some stitch markers or safety pins if you don't have stitch markers. So I'm using these locking stitch markers so you can place them in your project and remove them. Just kind of a handful of those, or safety pins, and that's for when we sew our squares together. And then you're going to need some sewing thread, a sewing needle, and a zipper. So your zipper, you can also wait to buy your zipper until after you have crocheted up your bag so then you know how long it needs to be. So, you know, you can just bring it to the fabric store or you can just measure it if you're ordering something. And just make sure your zipper is at least as long as your bag is wide. Okay, it can be longer, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the zipper. It can be longer, but not shorter. You can't make the zipper any longer, but you can make a zipper shorter very easily. So we'll get into that later. But you're going to need, you know, the sewing needle and sewing thread in order to attach your zipper to the bag. And then you'll need a yarn needle, of course, for weaving in any ends and doing a little bit of sewing with the yarn when we add all the granny squares together. All right. We've got a question from Amelia wondering how long does this project take to complete? Well, it depends. You know, I would say on average, like if you've crocheted before and you feel comfortable holding the hook, you know, you will find out after you make one square about how long it'll take you, because you can take that one square and you can multiply that by 10, and then you'll know how long it'll take for the whole bag and have a maybe more realistic idea. But just for me, I could make all of the squares in probably an evening or two, and then do assembly in another evening. So a couple of evenings. It just sort of, you know, like if I was working straight through, probably for me it would be like maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 hours perhaps. That's just a guess, but I also have been crocheting for a long time. So, you know, if you're a little bit newer at crocheting, it probably will take you a little bit longer than that. But this is a great project for beginners. You don't, you know, so if you don't have a lot of crochet experience, that's totally okay. Granny squares are easy to do. I'm going to be teaching you how to do them in just a minute. So, all right, let's see. Yeah, if you guys have any more questions, put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them while we're doing this live event. Or if you have any suggestions for future live events or any comments that might help anybody else out, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, so let's start out by making the granny square. So we're going to make a total of 10 granny squares for this project, and I'm going to start out. I'm going to basically make a duplicate of this granny square here with the same color changes. Now in the pattern, I did lay out how you can change your colors. I do have specific instructions for where the different colors go in each of those granny squares, and then where all of the granny squares can be arranged to place in the bag, because I know that sometimes people just don't want to think about the colors, and they don't want to worry about what looks good next to what, or you know, when to switch colors and that sort of thing, and they'd rather just follow something. You can absolutely do that. I have that all laid out in the pattern, and I'll be kind of talking about that a little bit once I get this granny square crocheted up. We'll get back into that. But feel free to use scraps. You know, you do not have to follow when I'm telling you to change color. You can continue with the same color. You could switch to a completely different color. You don't have to change. You don't have to use the same color order as I am using in my granny squares. Okay, so I'm going to start out with the pink, and I'm going to place a slip knot on my hook, and then I'm going to chain 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now I'm going to make a slip stitch in the first chain that I made, so that's the 4th chain from the hook. So I'm just going to insert my hook there, and then I'm going to yarn over, draw through that stitch, and draw through the loop on my hook, and that makes a very tiny little circle. It's a little bit hard to see the center. You kind of have to pull it apart a little, but this little ring here is where we're going to start working our stitches into. And if you're a person who likes to do an adjustable loop here, you can absolutely do that. Because this is a bag and it gets very heavy use, I like to start out with this chain first, because I feel like it makes it just a little bit sturdier, and it's a lot less likely to have any of the beginning yarn tails pop out or anything raveling. So that's why I like to use this chain 4. So now we're going to make chain 2, 1 and 2, or you can chain 3, just depending on how tall your double crochets are. You can adjust whether you're using 2 chains here or 3 chains here, so that it blends in with your other double crochets. So that's going to count as our first double crochet, and we're going to add 2 more double crochets into that ring. So we're going to yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. All right, so now what we have is this first couple of chains, like the chain 2 or chain 3 here, that's counting as a double crochet. And then this next stitch, of course, is a double crochet. So we've got 2 stitches so far. We're going to make another double crochet into that same ring. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we've got 3, what counts as 3 double crochets. Now we're going to chain 2. So 1 and 2. And we're going to do 3 double crochets again into the same ring. So 1, 2, and 3. Now we're going to chain 2, and we're going to repeat that same thing. So 3 double crochets in the same ring, 1, 2, 3, and chain 2, 1 and 2. And you may have noticed I'm actually crocheting over this beginning yarn tail. I'm just holding it behind the ring and crocheting around it. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can just let it hang to the back and not even worry about it. But I like to do that because it makes my weaving in the ends later at a later step just a little bit quicker, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to that point. Okay, and now we're going to do 3 more double crochets into that same ring. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And we'll do 2 more. 1 and 2. Okay, and then we're going to end with a chain 2, 1, 2, and then we're going to slip stitch into the top of that beginning chain because that counts as a stitch. So we're just going to make a slip stitch there, and that's going to join our first round. So it's kind of looking a little bit squarish here, like a rounded square. And then I'm going to cut off my yarn because I'm going to switch to the next color. And I'm just going to draw that right through. Okay, and then I'm going to pick up my next color, which is going to be this tan kind of color, this oatmeal color. All right, and then, so there's lots of different ways that you can join your next color. You can start with a slip knot on your hook. I feel like this is the easiest for beginners if you just start with a slip knot there. And then you can join into any of these little windows, any of these little corner spaces that you can see. So by placing your hook in there, and then you're going to just grab that yarn, pull it through, and then you can pull it through the loop that's on your hook. And now you are attached to your piece and ready to go. So I'm going to chain 2, 1 and 2. That's going to count as my first double crochet of the round, and I'm going to do 2 more double crochets into that same window. So 1 and 2. Now we're going to skip all of these stitches here. When we're making granny squares, we're never actually working into those double crochets until we do our edging. So, but as you're creating that granny square fabric, we're never actually working into those double crochets. We're going to skip over them, and we're going to make some double crochets into this chain 2 space over here. So we're going to do 3 double crochets. So 1, 2, and 3. And now we're at a corner, so we're going to chain 2, 1 and 2, and now we're going to do 3 more double crochets in that same space right here. So 1, 2, 3. We're going to skip those 3 double crochets, and we're going to repeat the same thing. So we're going to do 3 double crochets, 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to chain 2, 1 and 2, and then 3 more double crochets, 1, 2, 3. Skip those 3 double crochets and repeat. So 3 double crochets, 1, 2, 3, chain 2, 1 and, oops, dropped my stitch there, 1 and 2, and then we're going to do 3 double crochets in that same chained space. Amelia says, I'd love to make mine with bright scraps, pink, orange, and yellow for summer. Awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a citrus kind of palette. I love those colors together. That is definitely very summery. All right, and so now we've got, we've worked into all of those chain spaces, but this one only has that one group of 3 double crochets. So we're going to finish up by adding a second group of 3 double crochets. So 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to chain 2 and make a slip stitch right here at the top of what counts as that first double crochet. It was the top of our chain 2 or chain 3 if you do a chain 3 there. All right, so we'll slip stitch to join, cut our yarn so we can change to the next color, and I'm going to grab this green here. So I'm going to start with a slip knot on my hook, again like before, and I'm just making a slip stitch into any of those chain 2 spaces at the corner, okay? and then I'm going to chain 2, and then I'm going to do 2 double crochets into the same chain 2 corner. So now I have a total of what counts as 3. So we've got the chain 2, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And now we're going to skip those double crochets, and there's a little window here between these double crochets and these double crochets. And so we're going to work 3 double crochets into that little window. So here's the first one, second one, third one. And then we're going to move to the next corner, and whenever we get to a corner, we're going to do the series of 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. So here's 1, 2, 3 double crochets, chain 2, and another 3 double crochets into that same chain 2 space. See how that makes that bend around, and it creates that corner when we have all those stitches and that little chain 2 at the corner. All right, and so we're not at a corner here, but we are at a space between double crochets right there. So we're going to do 3 double crochets there. 1, 2, 3. And we've made it to the next corner, so we're going to do our series that we do at the corner. So 3 double crochets, 1, 2, 3, chain 2, and 3 more double crochets. 1, 2, 3. There's our next space between groups. So we're going to do 3 double crochets here. So basically, if there's a space between groups of 3 double crochets, you work 3 double crochets in that space. But if you get to one of those chain 2 corners, so it's a little bit bigger of a space and it's on the corner, then you need to do the series that is what you do at the corner, which is 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. Here's the third one, chain 2, and 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Then we move to the next space between groups, and we're going to do 3 double crochets here. 1, 2, 3. And now we've gotten to the same chain 2 corner where we started, and we're going to do 3 double crochets here. 1, 2, 3. And then chain 2, and then a slip stitch to the top of that chain 2. And we're going to cut the yarn and fasten off. All right, so now we're going to do our last color of the granny stitch pattern, and then we'll do a border. So I want to show you another way that you can join your yarn for those of you who don't like putting the slip knot on your hook and then doing the slip stitch. If you want to do it this way, you can just insert your hook straight through, and then you can have your yarn be on the back side, just kind of wrap it over and pull up a loop, and then you can hold these 2 strands together and make a chain 1, and then drop that first yarn tail, and now you can go ahead and chain 2 more, 1 and 2, or 3 if you're starting with a chain 3. Then you can go ahead and start working your double crochets. So there's 2 more double crochets that go there. And then we're going to skip across these, we're not working into our double crochets, we're going to work into the space between, which is right here, and that's where we place 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. And then there's another space here between groups of 3 double crochets, so we're going to do 3 double crochets there. 1, 2, 3. So if you wanted to keep going and make a large granny square, for another project, all you would need, you basically know everything you'd need to know to make an enormous granny square. You can just keep working in the stitch pattern where when you get to the corner, you do 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets, 1, 2, 3. And anywhere that isn't a corner, if there's a space between groups of 3 double crochets, like here or here, when you get to those spaces, you just place 3 double crochets. So 1, 2, 3. And move to the next. 1, 2, 3. And here we are at the corner, so we're going to do 3 double crochets, 1, 2, 3, chain 2, and then 3 more double crochets, 1, 2, 3. Skip to the next space between groups, 3 double crochets here, 2 and 3, and skip to the next space and 3 double crochets here, 1, 2, 3. Whoops. And there's the third one. Move to the next corner, so 3 double crochets here, 1, 2, 3. Then we have to do that chain 2 because we're at the corner, and 3 more double crochets into that same space, 1, 2, 3. We've got a hello from Kuwait. Oh, cool. Oh, you like the tote bag. Thank you. Thanks for saying hi. I appreciate it. It's always so amazing to me whenever I do live events and people say that they're watching from all over the world. It's just so humbling to me. And I think it's so awesome that we can all share our excitement about playing with yarn and making crafty things together and hang out, even though we're all over so far away from each other. It's really awesome that we can all come together and do that. Okay, so here's my second, my next 2 groups of 3 double crochets. I've gotten to that last corner. That's where we had started. Okay, so we're going to end with 3 double crochets right here. 1, 2, and 3. And I just want to talk for just a minute about what to do if you didn't want to fasten off here. Let's say you wanted to keep going in that color. If you wanted to make your bag all in only one color, or if you wanted to make your bag alternate between colors. Let's see, where did that one? Here it is, like this. You wouldn't have to fasten off every time you switch color. You can just kind of hang on to it and let it hang on the back of your work. But there's a little trick at the end. Instead of doing a chain 2 and then a join, because when you do that chain 2 and then join, then your working loop is way over here, and I really want my working loop to be right in the middle to be able to just continue in that color. So what I like to do, and you can join, even if you are changing color every single round, you can still do your joins this way if you want to. This is actually a really fun way to do joins. Instead of doing that chain 2 slip stitch, you can just do a half double crochet into the top of this stitch. So what that looks like is this. So you yarn over, just like you're going to do a double crochet, and then you insert into the top of that, either chain 2 or chain 3, whatever's counting as your first double crochet. You just insert, grab that yarn, pull up a loop, and now you have 3 loops on your hook. Then you yarn over and pull through all 3. And so what happens when you do that is your working loop ends up at exactly the corner of your square. And so you could just fasten off if you want to move on to the next color, or if you wanted to keep going, for this pattern, you would be done after you do those 4 rounds. But let's just say we had finished our round down here and we wanted to continue in the same color. What you would do is you could just go ahead and slip stitch right here and chain 2 or 3 and then just start working right here, okay? If you wanted to drop your yarn and leave your yarn attached, what you could do is you could pull up your next color. Let's just say we were alternating between blue and green and blue and green. What you could do if you wanted to switch to the next color is you could just pull that through your working loop, tighten that blue, and let that hang out back here, and then you can pick this up later if you need it again. So you would work your round in green, and I like to do a little slip stitch in here first. Actually, I make sure that whatever I'm hanging on to, whatever I'm going to come back to, I place that over to my right side, and then I do a little slip stitch in here, and that makes it look just like any other round, as if you had fastened off. And then you can go ahead and begin working as though you had cut your yarn. It would be exactly the same. Then you get all the way around, and then you can just do switch just like how I showed you by pulling up this loop and letting there be a little float of that color. So that's just, you don't need to know all of that. If you are just fastening off after each color like I'm showing you here, I just wanted to throw that in there for those of you who are curious about you know, only using 2 colors like that one sample I showed you, or if you wanted to just continue with the 1 color, like how you could go about doing that. Okay, so, oh, will it stretch over time? I've got a question about the bag. I'm guessing you're asking about the bag and not necessarily the strap. If you line it in a woven fabric, it really doesn't stretch out. I haven't had any problems. Where did my old bag go? Oh, so I brought my old bag in here, and I haven't had any problems about this getting misshapen because I have a woven lining on the inside of my bag, and you know, it's just this cotton lining in here. It's kept my bag from stretching out. So I have not had any problems with that at all, and as long as you put the lining in, it shouldn't stretch out. If you don't put the lining in, you know, it probably will stretch out somewhat. And also you will have these little holes, you know, between your stitches in your bag. So, you know, you can't really, you know, you might lose some little things, like a pencil might kind of fall out of your bag between those stitches if you don't line it. So that's why I put the lining in, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fasten off here. And then we're gonna do an edging. So I'm going to just move this gray out of the way for now because I'm using the color gray, and I just want to make sure you guys can really see this. So this is the color I'm going to use for my edging, and I'm just going to do a little edging of single crochet all the way around. So anywhere you want to, you can join your yarn just as I taught you before. You can place a slip knot on your hook, and you can just do a little slip stitch into any of those chain 2 corners. And then we'll chain 1, and then we're going to do 2 single crochets into the same chain 2 corners. So there's our 2. And then you're going to do 1 single crochet into each stitch across. Now we are working into the tops of those double crochets. Unlike the granny stitch pattern, which is here, for our edging, we are actually working into those double crochets. So this is our beginning chain. That does count as a double crochet, so don't forget that one. So I'm going to make my single crochet right in the top of that, and then a single crochet into each of the rest of the stitches. And to do a single crochet, just for review, if you've never done this before, you're going to insert your hook, yarn over, bring up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2 stitches. So that's your single crochet, and you're just going to make a single crochet into each stitch across until you get to that chain 2 corner. So we are going under both loops, you know, both loops of that little V, just how you normally would. There we go. Now we got to the chain 2 corner, and we're going to fill this up with 4 single crochets. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we're going to continue placing 1 single crochet into each stitch across. And after you make those 4, just make sure it's not covering up this first double crochet of that first group of 3, because you should be able to stitch into the top of that one as well. So 1 single crochet into each stitch across until we get to that chain 2 corner. And when you get to the chain 2 corner, you just work into that space and you make 4 single crochets into that space. There's a chain 2 corner, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, Eliza was confirming that it was about the bag. Just wondering if that would stretch out. Yeah, it shouldn't stretch out if you have that woven lining in there. It should be just fine. And the more sturdy of a lining fabric you choose, like if you choose a denim or a canvas or something, that's going to make it even more sturdy. So I just have a quilter's cotton, and I've been using my bag for years now, and I haven't had any problems with it. It hasn't frayed or come apart or anything like that. And I do, you know, I'm not very gentle with my bag, so I feel like it'll hold up just fine. But if you want to have a more kind of hefty feel to your bag, you know, feel free to use a heavier weight cotton fabric or, you know, woven fabric like a denim or canvas or something like that. All right, I just continued making 1 single crochet into each stitch around, except for those corners. When you get to those chain 2 corners, you're just going to put 4 single crochets into each chain 2 space. So we had started with just 2 single crochets in that chain 2 space, and we're going to end with 2 more. So I'm going to do 2 more single crochets, and I'm going to allow my stitch to just kind of cover up that little bit of a slip stitch that happened there when I joined my yarn. And then I'm going to just do a slip stitch in the very top of that single crochet, that first single crochet, and then I'm going to fasten off, but I'm going to give myself a good long yarn tail, like maybe half a yard or so. It has to be, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it's helpful if it can be long enough that you could stitch two sides of the square, and then you won't have to add any new strands of your yarn. So I flipped this over because I wanted to show you the back. We do have to weave in all of our yarn tails here. And the reason I crocheted over this one strand at the very beginning, we talked about this a little bit, is so I can pull on it and cinch in this ring. It'll make it smaller. See how that gets a little smaller there? If you don't want to do that, that's totally okay. You can just go ahead and weave, when you are weaving in this yarn tail, you can weave this through as many loops as you can. It's okay if you miss some. You're just going to go around in a circle like this. So that basically, serves the same purpose as crocheting over it. And then you can pull that tight to close that up. Now, the only reason we're closing that up is for aesthetic purposes. When you do that, it makes this a little smaller, and it keeps this from being a little bit of a bump. If you allow this to be a hole here, it just kind of wants to be raised a little bit in the middle of the square. It kind of sticks up just a little bit, but if you tighten that up, then it should flatten down just fine. But also you could just weave it in and leave it if you like how that looks with the hole in the center. If you blocked it, that little kind of protrusion will go away. It's not a big deal. So I'm just weaving this in to the color that it matches. And you're gonna have to do that for each yarn tail. And I would highly recommend doing this as you create each square, or doing, 2 squares at a time or 4 squares at a time, and then weaving in your ends and then moving on, because this is one of those things, I know a lot of people are not big fans of weaving in those yarn tails. And then they're like, oh, I'll just weave them all in at the end. But then when you get to the end, it makes you feel like you don't want to finish your project sometimes. So let me know if you feel like you could relate to that. So I will usually weave in my yarn tails as I go, or at least in groups. But also it just helps, if you want to watch a movie while you're weaving in your yarn tails, if you do end up saving them till the end, you can do that, and just, as long as you got something to keep yourself distracted, and just kind of settle in to weaving those tails. And it's really not that bad. Look, I've already woven in 4 while we were just talking about it, so it's not really that bad. But it can be a little overwhelming if you have 10 squares and they all need all these little ends to be woven in. So this is another reason you may be considering, carrying your yarn and alternating between 2 different colors. If you don't have a bunch of scraps you want to use up, and you just want to choose fewer colors and pull, and then carry your yarn tails up as you need them, like I did in that oatmeal and brown sample that I showed you guys earlier, then you have a lot fewer ends to weave in. So that's something to think about too. All right, I almost have these woven in here, and then we're going to get to the seaming section. Just going to grab my iron and get that heated up. I do really like to block my squares either before I stitch them together or right after I stitch them in partially together. I'll kind of talk about that a little bit as we get a little further into the assembly process. But I am going to go ahead and block the square just so that you guys understand what I mean by blocking, in case that's something that's new to you. But basically all it means is you're just either using water and soaking it, squeezing it out, letting it dry, but you're shaping the piece that you made so it looks nice and flat, and it matches the other sizes of the other squares. It's just a way of sort of finessing your pieces and making them look nice. And you can do that before you attach them all together, or if they seem pretty good, you can sew them together and then block them afterwards before you finish the assembly. So I'm gonna just show you how I like to block. Let's see. Oh, I don't think it's quite hot enough. We'll have to wait for just a little bit to do that. But I usually wait until I get my piece partially assembled, and then I block it all at once. Okay, so I can hear it heating up now, so it won't be too long. But what I want to call attention to here is in your pattern, there is a diagram, and that's to help you with the assembly. Oh, and by the way, if you are a chart person, this is the whole granny square charted out. So I put that in here so that you don't have to read through the directions if you don't want to. And just note, there are 2 chains here, but it could be 2 or 3. It doesn't matter. That's your beginning chain that counts as that first double crochet. And of course, like I said, if you wanted to join with a half double crochet here instead of that chain 2 slip stitch, you can of course do that as well. But this is just to kind of remind you how the granny square goes together, you know, where to put them, how many at each corner, and that sort of thing. And down here, this tells you what the stitches or what all the symbols stand for. But basically, it's just a picture representation. Okay, so here is the diagram I wanted you guys to see. This is showing you how to assemble all the squares together. I know it doesn't look like that half moon shape yet, but it will. And I also wanted to explain what these letters are. So we have A, B, C, and then C, D, A, B, A, D, C. So what that is telling you is where to put those squares. And if you just made them out of complete scraps, or if all your squares are the same, you can just disregard those letters. That doesn't apply to you. But if you followed my instructions in here where I tell you where to change colors, so for example, here we have square A. So this pink counts as the color 1. This would be color 2, color 3, color 4. So we would make 3 of these. So I'm telling you, make 3 of square A. We would make 3 in the exact same pattern. So I just made one here. And there should be one more in here somewhere. Let's see. Oh, it's right here next to me. So I've got 3 of these, right? So that's square A. And then square B, we would start with color 4, which was the blue at the middle. So this would be 4, 1, 2, 3. And then color 5 is always the edging. Okay, so we would have 2 of these. And then square C would be color 3. Starts at the middle, so 3, 4, 1, and 2. 3, 4, 1, and 2. So you would make 3 of these. And then square D, we start here with, let's see, color 2. So 2, 3, 4, and then 1. Okay? So if you were following my directions here, then you would know exactly when to change your color, and then I would tell you, oh, square A goes right here. So you would arrange this the same as the diagram. So this would be A, B, C, and then on the next row we have C, and then D, and then A. So we've got these like this. And then below D at the center, we have B, which is this square right here. And then we've got another A, and then let's see, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then it must be this one. Yes, A, and then D, and then C. Okay, so you would arrange your pieces so you've got 3 across here, 3 across here, 1 and 3. And then you can sew all those seams between your squares. And I'm going to show you, oh, now that my iron is hot enough, I'm going to show you how to block this piece. So you just give it a little bit of steam. I'm just hovering it above. I'm not actually touching it. And then you just sort of move the iron away and pat it into place, and it stays nice and flat. It stops it from curling. All right, so once you get this all laid out, and like I said, this chart, this diagram right here, this really only applies to you if you would rather have, if you'd rather follow specific instructions on where to place those granny squares, and not end up with 2 granny squares that are the same right next to each other. This is just helping you do that. But if you just made them however you wanted with changing the color, however you liked, don't worry about it, but you're still going to place them in the same shape. Okay, so you're still gonna arrange them in the same shape. It just doesn't matter, what goes where. You can just kind of lay them out, move them around till they look nice next to each other, and then you can start sewing them together. So I would recommend, especially if you did not use my diagram, take a picture of what it looks like before you start sewing, because sometimes we get interrupted when we're sewing and then we can't remember where everything went before. So just take a quick picture, and then that way you'll have that information just in case you have to put it away before you get finished seaming them together. So now we have all these long yarn tails because we fastened off with those. And I'm going to start seaming my pieces together. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to sew in this direction. I always try to sew at least 2 sides with the length of yarn that I have. And I usually take a look at where my next yarn tails are and position my squares so that it's useful. So for example, right now I have two yarn tails coming out of the same point. That's not very useful to me, especially because there's nothing that's going to be seamed across here. So I'm going to rotate this over here so that my yarn tail is over here, so that might be useful for somewhere else, okay? And then I'm going to seam this together. And I'm going to rotate this piece. Whoops. I'm going to rotate this piece so that way I can stitch here and here, and then I have a yarn tail ready to go right here. You don't have to arrange everything, it's just, just look at where your yarn tails are and just make sure that they're in a place that's going to be useful later on. So I'm just going to do a whip stitch where I run my needle underneath both sets of V's that are on each side here, so each edge. So I go under these and under this. And if you are a person who likes to join as you go, your crochet squares, you can just use this diagram and do whatever join as you go method you like to do instead of sewing this. I know that there are some people who absolutely do not like sewing in their crochet projects, so I get that, and you can definitely do that last round as some kind of join as you go method. You don't have to do the same kind of single crochet border that I have, or you could do the single crochet border and then you could crochet the edges together. However you want to attach these is completely fine. The reason that I like doing this sort of seaming, whip stitching, is because it allows you a chance to move your squares around and really change where the colors line up next to each other. Sometimes I've done join as you go in the past, and unless I have the whole thing absolutely planned out, sometimes it bugs me when I join things together and then I wish that I could have, I wish I hadn't joined those as I went, because now I can't put this square here, and I think those colors look so nice next to each other. So that is just something to think about. That's basically the reason why I really don't mind doing this whip stitching. Plus, I feel like it can give it a little bit of extra structure, and I like how nice and flat it lays. It's very, it just looks really nice to me. I just like how it looks. So, and another thing to think about too is if you really like that patchwork and you have a bunch of different colors going on, maybe you're using up scraps and you're kind of have a scrappy aesthetic. Doing this whip stitch with a contrasting color looks really cool too, to have all those little whip stitches just kind of coming through in a different color. I really like that. Or using a color changing yarn to do that. That's kind of fun too. I like doing that. All right, so I have made it across and I'm kind of running out of yarn. So I'm just going to go ahead and bury that into the back of my stitches. So I'll just bring that over here and then weave this back and forth through my stitches before I cut it off. Just like that. All right, so I've got the first 2 stitched together, well, these 3 actually. And then I would maybe I would go with stitching here and then to there, and then using this yarn tail to just stitch down here and letting it hang. If you have a bunch of a yarn tail, don't cut it off, just let it hang if it's somewhere near the outer border of this piece, because later we're going to use that when we seam that, when we finish seaming. Okay, so you're going to just sew all your pieces together using the whip stitch as they are laid out. And I'm going to pick this up and move it, and I'll show you my next sample here. So this piece has already been stitched into that formation. Whoops, let's see, here we go. There's our 6 at the top, 1 here, and 3 across here. And then, so what happens is I'm gonna flip this over so the right side is facing down. Okay, so the right side is the side that's always facing you when you're crocheting. That's gonna be down on the table. And then I'm gonna fold this up just like that, matching it up with the top. And then these 2 areas, these are, whoops, sorry about that. These 2 areas here, these are gonna get folded up like this. Okay, so this is gonna make the bottom of the bag. So you can see what that's gonna look like when we stitch that. So you would just take your yarn tails and continue stitching these edges here and then weave in your ends, same thing. This is exactly the same technique. You can use a whip stitch here. And then also you're going to be seaming up these side edges here as well. So seam those side edges and seam these edges as well. Okay, and then the whole thing will be stitched together. And let's see, where did that go? Oh, here we go. Okay, so it'll look like this once you get it all stitched together. Okay, and then after that, you're gonna do 2 rounds of single crochet. This just kind of helps you give it a nice place for the zipper to be up at the top, as well as just kind of evens out this little bumpy stuff that happens when you stitch granny squares together and kind of has that little divot there. So you're just going to go ahead and pull up a loop of the color that matches whatever color you want, but I usually use the outside border color. I'm going to chain 1, that doesn't count as a stitch. And then I'm going to go ahead and just do a single crochet into each stitch all the way around. So all the way around this whole bag. Just working 1 stitch into each stitch around. You'll come around to this edge here, and then you can choose if you want to do a slip stitch join into that stitch, or if you don't want to do a join, you can just make your last single crochet here and then start again with a single crochet in the top of this stitch and do 1 more round. Okay. And that would look like this. So here I had just finished my very last stitch. I'll put the hook back in there. That was my last stitch. And then you can just do a slip stitch, pull through, and cut your yarn and pull it through, and then you can weave it in. Okay? So then at this point, you are ready to start figuring out your lining. Actually, let's do the little rings first. We're going to make those little rings to place on each edge of the bag, or each side of the bag. So we're going to chain 6. So I'm going to place a slip knot on my hook. We're going to chain 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm going to slip stitch into the first chain. And we're making a ring here, so there's a little circle. And then at that point, you're just gonna basically fill this up with single crochets. I usually do 12 in here, but you don't have to count them if you don't want to. But you're gonna just insert, yarn over, pull up a loop. And actually, if you can, crochet over that yarn tail right here, this little yarn tail. That's gonna make things a little easier for you. So single crochet into that opening and around the yarn tail. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if it's too awkward to stitch around that yarn tail, don't worry about it. You can do the same trick that I showed you before, where you can just use a yarn needle and weave it into all of those stitches. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right, and we'll just do a little slip stitch into that very first stitch. And I'm going to cut my yarn, leaving a decent tail for sewing. So we're going to bring that on through. And then this can be stitched to the side of your bag. So we're going to stitch that right here on that sort of side seam. And you can go ahead and weave in those ends. I'm just going to skip to over here, just in the interest of time. And I'm going to actually, I think I'm going to pull that beginning yarn tail. Now, if you didn't crochet over it, this would be the point where you should use your needle to run it through all of those stitches. I'm just going to pull it through I'm just pushing it through to the front of the circle here and letting it hang out the front, because that's going to help me a little bit later. And I'm using that ending yarn tail here. I'm threading that onto a needle. And I'm going to use that to sew the bottom of this ring. Like basically you just pick 6 of the stitches that are towards the bottom and you're gonna stitch them onto the bag. So I'm gonna move this over here and we'll stitch. We're just gonna do a little whip stitch. So there's 1. I'll stitch through, I would probably stitch through each stitch at least twice because you want this to be extremely sturdy. This is where your strap is going to be hanging through, and there's going to be a lot pulling on this. So I would definitely, make sure you're using a sturdy yarn for this and stitch a couple times through each of those stitches. So you can sew in one direction, come back, sew in the opposite direction. Just like that. And then we can go ahead and weave in our tails. Okay, so you can just pick a place to weave it in. And do a good job of weaving that in because you really don't want that to ravel on you, because that might allow your strap to come out. You don't want that. All right, so we're going to leave this hanging out here. This we're going to use later when we are inserting the handle through. We're going to possibly use that to tighten up this hole just a little bit. We're just keeping our options open. All right, so then at this point, you're going to lay this on top of your fabric, and then you're going to trace around it and cut out your piece. So we'll lay this on our fabric like this, and you can use, I'll bring this down here like this, I think. You can use, a pencil or a marker or whatever you like, and usually I will just turn this inside out. So see how I have a right side and an inside? This is what I want to show on the inside of my bag. This is what is going to be facing. This is going to be basically backing your the granny squares and kind of showing towards the outside. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically the lighter color of this fabric is going to be facing outward, if that makes sense. So I'm going to place it so that what I want to be on the inside of the bag is actually on the inside of this fold, or if you have 2 separate pieces, that's completely fine too, but you want those right sides together. And then you're going to lay your bag on top of it, and then you can go ahead and just trace around it and give yourself a little bit of a seam allowance. So I like to trace so that I have, I would say, at least a 1/2 inch or so to the outside of my bag. And if you haven't already blocked your piece, this would be a good time to block it. And if you want to shape it and so it's a little bit more round here, you can pull on this to make it a little more rounded instead of a flat folded triangle if you want. That works really well with if you steam it. So you just want to make sure you're not accidentally drawing on your bag. This is a marker that will go away with water or possibly air, I can't remember. I think it just fades away. So I'm not worried about getting it on my bag, but you may want to use a pencil or something, be a little bit more careful so that you don't get any markings on the outside of your bag. And so I want to have a 1/2 inch all the way around my bag, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. So use some fabric scissors, and I'm cutting on the line because that is including my seam allowance. So I can go ahead and just cut on that line that I drew. And if you want to be real careful about things, you can, and make sure that it's symmetrical. What you can do is you can cut halfway around your bag like this and then fold the other side. And see, that actually matches pretty well, so I'm not even worried about it. But if you decide that it's a little bit wonky, you can kind of fix that and make sure that it's nice and symmetrical. When think of your yarn as being a little bit more malleable, you can always block your yarn, the yarn part of your bag to match the inside shape of whatever you drew. As long as it's pretty close, you'll be just fine. Okay, so then If you happen to have a sewing machine, if you're a sewist and you have a sewing machine, that's great. You can just do one seam that's that 1/2 inch away from the edge, stitch all the way across. If you don't have a sewing machine, that's completely fine. You just use your hand sewing needle and a doubled piece of all-purpose thread, and we're going to just do basically a back stitch. So I'm just going to get started by making one little stitch here, and you just want to be a 1/2 inch away. If you want to draw that seam line for yourself to make it easier for you to not wobble back and forth, you can absolutely do that. But I just took one little stitch here, so I go 1 stitch back and then 2 steps forward. Like, see where my thread comes out? I went back and then it came out in front of where my thread is. So I'll show you that a few more times. So you're going to go 1 step back and 2 steps forward, okay? And the reason that I like to do this is because you don't end up with a gap between your stitches, even if you're not doing the tiniest stitches ever. If you do smaller stitches, it's going to be a little sturdier. So don't make your stitches too big. But this size should work just fine. There, it's probably a little less than 1/4 of an inch per stitch. Somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch, I guess. Okay, so you're just going to continue making your stitch line, and it's going to go all the way around here. If you run out of thread, that's okay. You just tie a little knot, cut it, and then start again and keep going. Okay, and then and your piece should look about like this, you know, when you're done. I actually did use a sewing machine on this one so you guys could see what that looks like. Got a little sewing machine seam here. And then you're going to go ahead and press. You can try this in your bag and then press back any excess fabric. You can start by pressing back a 1/2 inch and then slip it into your bag and then press back even a little bit more. So you can see here's the right side of my fabric. The right side is coming towards this wrong side here, and we're just pressing it just to make it a little easier for us to insert it into our bag. Now I'm going to place this in my bag, and you should have a ring on each side already, okay? So I'm going to place this in my bag and just check it. So I'm going to place the seam on each side, and remember you can kind of steam your bag to fit this lining if you need to kind of reshape it a little bit. But it should be a pretty close fit because you use that as your pattern. So this looks like it's going to fit just fine. All right, but before we sew our lining in, so after you've realized, okay, that's going to work pretty well, I like how that looks, before you sew that in, we're going to add our zippers. So if you have a zipper but it's too long, like this zipper would be too long, you can just find a point. You can place your zipper inside here. Have your teeth go from one corner, draw your zipper across, and say to yourself, okay, that's a pretty good length of a zipper right here. I wish my zipper was that long. So I'm going to put a pin right here. And then I can use my needle. Let's see, I think I left it in here. All right, so then you can just use a needle and thread, just all-purpose thread works, or if you have button thread or embroidery floss, that would work as well. And you're just going to make a sturdy little tack across the teeth. You can even do this on a sewing machine. I do that all the time. If you're doing it on a sewing machine, have your zipper in your sewing machine and you can straddle and stitch a zigzag back and forth, and then just don't have a very long stitch length. But basically, you're just telling that zipper, hey, you're not going to unzip past this point. Okay, so you just can go ahead and stitch on, make a bunch of little stitches right on top of each other right here. Oops, I got a little snag here. There we go. So you can just make a bunch of stitches. I would say at least 6, if not more. You're never going to regret, you're never going to later look at your purse and say, man, I wish I didn't spend that extra 30 seconds putting more stitches in that zipper. Okay, so you're going to have a nice thick place here where it's stitched, and then you can go ahead and make a knot, tie it off, and cut your thread. Okay, to do that, I just make a little loop like this, tuck my needle under, and pull that through. And then you can just cut this off, okay? And then if you have a lighter, you can melt the edge of that and it won't fray at all. But we are going to be placing this between a lining and a crochet fabric, so you don't need to worry too much about that if you don't have a lighter. That's okay. Alrighty, so to get your zipper in, I am going to, let's see, I'm going to use this purple zipper actually for this particular bag. And you're going to want to pin this into place. This zipper actually was used from a zipper yardage, so there's no top and no, like I made my own bottom by stitching it. So I just have to make sure that my, the zipper pull isn't gonna fall off. That's why I have that safety pin there. But I'm gonna just pin this in here. I think that would be a video or a live event for a future day, is how to make shortened zippers out of zipper yardage, or how to make the length that you want, basically. So you're going to pin the top and pin the bottom of your zipper into your bag. And this does take a little bit of patience here. I know zippers can be tricky for people, but just know that for anyone, even if you put in like hundreds and hundreds of zippers, like I've put in hundreds of zippers, probably more than 1,000 zippers, it still takes a little bit of time of fiddling with it just to get it in the right spot. So I usually get the bottom and the top pinned in like this, and then I will start working on the sides. And what you want is you want your crochet fabric to be close to the teeth but not touching the teeth, because you want to make sure the zipper pull can pass by and not get snagged into your fabric. So I am just using pins as though that I'm sewing with them. So I'm poking them into the fabric, poking them in, poking them out, okay? And then I kind of try to hide the little sharp end in there. Poking it in, poking it out. Okay. And I really like to pin both sides. You can go ahead and stitch one side if that seems less awkward to you, but I like to pin both sides in just to make sure that everything's where I want it to be. One thing you may want to look at is, where do these seams intersect? Do they intersect? They should be about where these seams are. I'm going to shift this over just a little bit to make that more even, because it may not bother you when it's flat, but maybe when your purse is full of stuff, then that's when you'll notice that distinct line between squares might be shifted off to one side, on the front or on the back. So I'm trying to only pin through the crochet fabric, and I'm just pinning into one layer of that zipper. Now it's easy to snag more stuff, so you can go ahead and, once you get it pinned in a few places, you can unzip this and see if you did snag. Well, I guess I didn't, but if you had snagged it, it wouldn't open up, and then you could kind of fix that while it's open. But it is helpful to have it zipped up just so that you can check where these squares are intersecting from one side to the other. All right, so now I'm going to stitch I'm going to stitch my zipper in place using, again, that same back stitch that I showed you. And I'm stitching through just the crochet fabric and one layer of the zipper, of course. So you can start anywhere. I usually don't start at one of the ends. I work into those ends later. I'm gonna start right here and just, I have a double strand of thread and I have a knot in the end of it, right there. And I'm gonna make sure that that gets trapped down so it's not gonna get stuck into the zipper teeth. So I'm gonna take a stitch backwards from where I came out and go 2 steps forward. So I'm going to do 1 step backwards. So here, this is where my thread is coming out, and I'm going in here and coming out in front of where my thread came out. This is where my thread came out right here. So I'm making these stitches along just below where those little V's are. All those V's in the top edge of my crochet fabric. So taking a step back, going 2 steps forward. And my needle is always, because I'm a right-handed stitcher, my needle is always pointing to the left. If you were a left-handed stitcher, it would always be pointing to the right. So go in behind, come out in front. And so let me show you what's happening back here. So that's what those stitches look like on the inside. And you're just going to continue this all the way around the whole zipper. Now when you get to this edge here, on both edges, you will just have to insert your needle through. So again, there should be a ring here at this point. That should be attached before you sew your zipper in. But you're going to stitch through here and you can go underneath that zipper and come out the other side over here. Let me show you where that pin is going. So see that pin? It's right here. Sorry, this pin, I'm going to pull this pin out so you're not confused. There's a pin that is right here going across. So that's what you're going to do when you get to this end. You're just going to go right through and then continue going all the way across this other side. And if you run out of thread, that's okay. You just can tie it off and then you just grab a new strand of thread, double-stranded, tie a knot in it, and then just go ahead and start. So this doesn't have to be absolutely beautiful because you are going to cover this up with your lining. So as long as it's sturdy and it's keeping that yarn away from the teeth in the top of the bag, you should be just fine. So that's what it looks like on the back. It's not perfect, but that's okay. And then once you get that stitched in, then you can go ahead and place your lining inside the bag. And take your time to really get it situated in the right spot. And you're going to have to pin this in again. Once again, you got to pin. You got to pin it in place before you start to sew it. So you're going to have that seam right there on the edge. And this is you want this to cover up your stitch line of your zipper tape, but just barely. So there's my stitch line, and you want that fabric to be right there, right on the edge of it, and pin that in place, okay? So again, your zipper would be fully stitched in at this point, and you'd be lining up that folded edge so that it just covers up that stitch line that you made. And then you can go ahead and start doing a little whip stitch around the edge, and I've got another sample here that's partially done, this one here. Let me see if I can catch up on my... Oh, thanks, Debbie, for the compliment about my pretty squares. Oh, and Pam loves the granny squares too. Yeah, I'm so glad that granny squares came back into fashion because they're so fun to make, and I really love using up scraps and combining colors together. It's really fun for me. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this. I already started stitching this, but I'm stitching it in a lighter color, so you probably can't see those little stitch lines. But I'm going to thread this in this darker color here so that you can hopefully see how we stitch the lining in. So it is partially stitched in. That's why there's no pins in it right now, because I already started stitching it in. So you're going to have, once again, you're going to have your thread doubled, and you're going to tie a little knot in the end. And so you would have all these little pins. I just want to put these in here so that it looks more like how it'll look when you put your lining in. Okay, so You should have all these little pins holding it together. And so here's some stitching right here. I actually did a little whip stitch along the edge of my zipper too, which I don't think is absolutely necessary, but if you are concerned about your zipper pulling out for some reason, you could do a whip stitch along the edge of your zipper as well as that back stitch, which is right here. But then when you get your lining pinned in place, you can just start that anywhere. I'm just sliding my needle anywhere in between the two layers. So the layer of your lining fabric and between that and that and your zipper tape. And you're just going to take a little tiny stitch around the edge. You're doing a whip stitch, but you're also going into that zipper tape. And you want to go in right where you had already stitched before and take a little stitch. I'm coming out right next to that fold. Oops. There we go. So you'll end up with these little whip stitches along the edge. You can also do a blind stitch if you want. So I'll show you that as well. So as you're stitching along, you're just making a little tiny stitch. And I really like to try and grab a little bit of that crochet fabric. You don't want your needle to come all the way through it, but I like to go through the zipper tape and grab just a little of the crochet fabric just to make it a little sturdier as you make these little whip stitches. And I think that looks really good. But for those of you who want to do a more hidden seam, you can go in there, grab a little bit of that zipper tape, and then come back to the folded top in your lining and slide your needle through just a little bit of that. And you're going to go back into the zipper tape, into that very top of the fold. I'm just sliding it into the top of that fold there and pull through. So see how you don't see these little whip stitches anymore? You don't really see anything. I feel like this is not as sturdy as these little whip stitches. That's why I prefer the little whip stitches. Those seem to hold in place a little bit better. It really keeps this nice and flat. This looks nice too. I mean, this looks really nice. It looks very nice and finished. You can't even see your stitches, but I always feel like, for me, I want it to function better, and it's going to be pretty anyway. You don't need to worry about seeing all those little stitches, in my opinion, but for those of you who like that to be completely hidden, you can do that as well. So you're just going to stitch all the way around. When you get to these ends, you can kind of open this up. Here, let me show you. There's the zipper is stitched in there. That can just reach right across. You can go ahead and slip stitch those together. I left this side open as well so you could see. Okay, so you can just stitch that all the way across, just like that. All right, so then we've just got a couple more things to talk through real quick, and I know we're kind of running over on our time, but the handle, the strap, you're going to make that out of 3 colors of yarn. So you can just choose whatever 3 colors you want or have enough of. Think about how long you want that strap to be, and then you're going to double that. So if you wanted, your strap to be, 36 inches, you would cut your pieces at 72 inches. And the reason we're cutting them so super long is because we do use up quite a bit of the length when we're making that braid. And also, I just want to make sure that after you do all that braiding, I just don't want it to be too short. So it's probably going to be a little too long. You're probably going to have to cut off like 6 inches or so, but it's hard to control how tightly people braid. So I wanted to make sure that there's for sure enough. Okay, so you're going to take whatever you want, double it, and then you're going to cut 6 pieces of each of those 3 colors. So you will have a total of 18 strands. Let me show you what that looks like here. You're going to have, so I've got 6 purple, 6 of that oatmeal color, 6 of the green, and I, cut this very, very long, okay? And then you're going to line them up. Just try to keep them from tangling, line them all up, and then tie an overhand knot. So to do that, you can just hold them in your hand, bring them all around together, and bring them through, and tie a knot, okay? I already had a knot in there, but I'm just adding an extra knot in case you don't know how to do that. And then you can take this knot and you can pin that to something, or you can tie another knot down here and hook it around a door knob. But basically you have to anchor this to something. I'm going to anchor it to this little bag here. Ideally it would be something that's a little heavier than this bag, but I needed something portable. So I'm just going to use a safety pin through the knot, and that's gonna allow me to make this braid. So you're gonna separate it into the different colors that you have. And you do kind of have to just pull it all the way through. Like make sure that it really is separated all the way to the ends. And then you're going to start doing a regular 3-strand braid. So you'll do this over to the middle. Then you're gonna do the left side to the middle. What I mean by middle is between the other 2 pieces. So the green goes between the other 2. Now we're gonna take the left side, other 2. And after you do a few of those, you know, back and forth and back and forth, after you do a few of those, you have to go through and pull them all the way through the bottom. Like you really have to run your hand along the whole thing and untangle the bottom. Because if you just keep braiding like this, what you're doing, you can see this right below my braid, is you're actually braiding this also. And then you're gonna make a big mess when you try and pull that through later. So, you know, every few, you just got to go back through and fix it. But it gets a lot quicker when you get towards the end of the braid. So you're just going to do this until you get your braid to the length that you want it to be. Plus you need a little bit of excess because that's going to become the tassel. And then you're going to take, here I'm going to switch over to my next sample here. And then you're going to take that end, okay, so after you've braided it, you can go ahead and send all of that through this little loop here, and you can do that. What makes it a little easier is if you have a little piece of yarn folded over, you can slide that through here. Actually, let's do this first because this is a short piece of yarn. You can wrap that right around your tassel that you're trying to bring through, and then you just put those 2 ends right through that little loop and pull it through like that. Okay, so that'll help you thread it through your little loop at the end of your bag, and then you can decide how long you want it, and then you can go ahead and tie another overhand knot. So I'm going to tie one here. That'll probably be about right, and then I'm going to go ahead and just unravel whatever's below that, and then you can trim that off to wherever you want it to be. I like to do about 3 overhand knots, and I try to put them on top of each other because I feel like I want this to be really secure, and so I make as big of a knot as I can. Maybe 2 will be enough, and it's not going to fit through that. Yeah, it definitely won't. But if you're having trouble and you think it's going to come through, then you're going to grab that little extra yarn tail. I think I left them in here somewhere. Here we go. Let's see. So this should be hanging on the outside of your little ring. Remember I pulled that through before, so that was hanging on the outside. So if you're worried about this popping through that ring, what you can do is you can pull on this tail to make that ring smaller. I'm adjusting it by pulling on it to make that smaller, so there's no way that this can come through. It's just not going to be able to go through, okay? And then you can go ahead and weave that back and forth and weave in your ends. You could even go around that disc a couple of times if you're worried about it. You want to make it nice and sturdy. And then, yeah, that's it. That's how you would attach the handle. Let me just check and see if I missed anything. Looks like I answered all the questions. All right. Well, that was a lot all in one lesson, but I really wanted to show you guys the zipper, the lining, and this cool strap and the little tassel-y bits. So you guys can make your own bags. Thanks so much for joining me, everyone. Bye.